not gonna bother with an intro this time. We're just gonna jump right into it. So, evidently, since our recording is, since our recording yesterday, it seems like a lot more information has came out. And you texted me as I was rendering it, saying, "Hey, can we record more?"
Yeah, can we record more? There's been some new information.
Yeah, so the original podcast is up at this point, but I'm happy to talk about more. So, what are we looking at in terms of additional stuff? Because I'm hearing like sporadic stuff. I watched a lot of the Halo YouTubers seem to have gotten a lot more information than I initially got from the trailer. What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were able to attend like a media press briefing that was kind of like we were able to talk to the creative leads directly. We were able to ask them questions and stuff. So some things were actually answered more in depth, but it's also, part of the marketing. So some of it is like really weirdly vague because I'm sure they're kind of like locked down on certain topics that they can talk about.
I'm sure. So what's the biggest change you've heard then?
Okay, so I didn't know if it was open world or not. Some people were reporting it as open world. Some people were describing levels as worlds. There was just kind of like a lot of conflicting information. So 343 has straight up avoided using the words open world to describe the type of game that it is. They seem to just say worlds. And so what I'm thinking is that it might be linear. But the levels will just be so expansive that you can kind of roam wherever you want within the level.
I mean, the word I was hearing was that if there's anywhere you see in the level, in theory, you can get to it. I know all the zones are apparently going to be separated by little canyons, so you can't get to everywhere from everywhere right off the bat. But it seems like there's going to be a rather large amount of mobility. And
yeah, have you ever played Metro Exodus?
I played a little of the first Metro, but not the third one.
Okay, the way that Metro Exodus handles open world is actually kind of clever. It's not like Far Cry where you just go wherever you want on the map and do. There is a linear flow to it. Like the developers have built a giant environment, but it's kind of like the objectives that you tackle are very specific. And so every time that you play that game, you're always navigating the open world in more or less the same way. So in a lot of ways, that game did feel linear, even though it was an open world. And it actually benefited from that. So it's like, if you wanted, you could go off the beaten path, but you're kind of traveling across the world in the wrong direction if you do that.
Yeah. I saw you shared Alana Pierce's interview with it, and she was talking about how the game kind of has like a Ghost of Tsushima feel to it, where it's it's quasi-open world, but yeah, it's like it's also the structure of the game is linear, but the levels itself are open.
Yeah, it's like, imagine if, okay, so like linear, when we think of that definition, we think of like a hallway from point A to point B. It's like, imagine if that hallway was gigantic.
Yeah.
So it's like, yes, it is still linear, but the hallway is like miles long.
There you go.
That's what it seems like. And it's like, hey, I am totally on board with that if that is the case.
Well, that doesn't sound too shocking based on what we've seen, because it seems like if the game is completely open world, it probably would be a little bit structureless. But
yeah, that was the primary concern, is like you kind of run into that Ubisoft problem where it's like, yeah, the world is like cool and all, but there isn't that structure, there isn't that like, oh, I want to replay this part of the game, because the whole game is just kind of like, we don't want to hold your hand, player, do whatever you want. And it's like, no, I want rules, give me rules.
Yeah, exactly. Although the thing that the words I heard that seemed to be the most interesting was that there's supposedly there's going to be levels set not just on the Halo ring. It seems like,
yeah, that was interesting. What does that mean?
I wonder if it's going to tie into the novel they've got coming out in the fall, because I know that novel's supposed to be a prologue and it's set on Reach. I wonder if there's gonna be like jumping between lots of my guess is that there's gonna be like interludes in the middle of the game where they're gonna like flash back to specific missions where you're not on the ring, because it seems like the game is gonna be at least starts in real time in media res once the battle has happened.
Somebody had an interesting theory on Reddit where he was saying, all right, they're spiritually rebooting Halo. They're clearly trying to kind of evoke combat evolved memories. I mean, that demo that we saw was almost exactly like the second level. You know, you come out of a crashed thing, you can see the ring. So somebody was saying, what if one of the missions is we have to board a banished ship? Kind of like Truth and Reconciliation.
That would make sense. I mean, I'd hope the game isn't that slavish to obeying the structure of Combat Evolved, but if nothing else, it does suggest that there's probably going to be a lot of variety to the game.
Yeah, I don't mind following the structure of Combat Evolved, because it would be one thing if it was a traditional Halo game. Kind of like, I mean, Halo 5 obviously was a bit weird, but that game still did kind of follow the Halo formula. You had your linear levels that you played. This seems very different from the traditional Halo formula, so taking Combat Evolved's kind of beats, but recontextualizing them within a completely different style of playing Halo, it could be interesting.
Potentially. Have they actually stated what rating the game is going to be? I just thought of that, because I know 5 was a T-rated game. I'm curious if they're actually going to go back for M.
I think it's rated T, at least on the Xbox store right now.
Okay, that's interesting, because that definitely rules out the Flood, because there's no way they're going to be T-rated Flood in a Halo game.
The Flood can definitely be done in a teen rating. You just have to kind of... You'd have to, I don't want to say censor, because that implies that, like, they had it one way and then they changed it, as opposed to building it from the ground up for the specific rating. They'd have to kind of, like, modify the way that they do approach the Flood. Like, one of the things I believe in teen rating is you can't have humanoids losing limbs.
Yeah, and I remember that the famous animation from Halo 3 where you turn the corner and you watch the Marine get turned into the Flood. Like, you couldn't have something like that in there, where you just watch a person... And it would be hard to... You'd have to kind of finagle it and make it within the bounds of a T rating, though.
Yeah, you'd have to finagle it. So, when you look at, like, that Marine turning into a Flood, that could... I think it could work in a teen rating, because when the Marine is, like, thrashing about and mutating, there's not, like, red blood spraying everywhere. It's, like, Flood gas and spores coming off of his body, and, like, all this green goo and stuff, so there's not a lot of gore to that. There's implied gore, but it's not actually a very violent sequence.
It's still grotesque. Like, I remember
it's grotesque. Yeah.
I showed it to a friend of mine, or I played it with a friend of mine who hadn't played Halo 3 recently, and she's like, this is all really unsettling and gross.
Yeah, that's a very, very unsettling thing. It's also like a pretty clever way for the developers to be like, guys, look at the new technology we have. We can transform people into Flood while they're still alive.
Oh yeah, that's one of those like show off moments. You just do it because the game developer's like, yeah, look how good we are now.
That's like in the first level, Sierra 117. That's why that level is littered with dark caves and then coming out of the caves into direct sunlight, so that the developers can show off their like incredible kind of contrast system, the way your eyes will kind of adjust to lighting. Yeah.
Well, they've been doing that since Half-Life, but...
Yeah, every single video game is at some point just an excuse for the developers to brag about their new technology. And it is fun. I always love when I play a video game and I like come to a cliffside and see a really impressive thing and I'm like, all right, developers, this is cool. I get it.
Yeah, we have characters animated with skeletal animation. They can walk in a straight line.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's so quaint. But we didn't talk about the book coming out. Do you have any thoughts on the Shadows of Reach book?
The Shadows of Reach book okay, so from what I understand from the synopsis, their blue team is going to the planet Reach, and they're retrieving something there?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have tons of details on it, but they pretty much already confirmed that they're going to meet the Banished on Reach.
Oh, that's right. They were like something like a mysterious alien force. And it's like, it's probably the Banished, isn't it?
I mean, it's not like they're going to pull the precursors out on us at this point.
The precursors really like the planet Reach.
Oh gosh, that'd be...
Yeah.
Can't wait until they finally pull that plug.
They're not going to do the precursors, and that's for the best, because the precursors, what makes them super cool is that we don't know a lot about them and they're super mysterious. So if you just shine a spotlight on them, that makes them not cool anymore.
And unless they get completely desperate and like, oh, we have to do something. We're gonna do all the things we never did in a Halo game before.
Yeah. If they get really desperate, bring back the Flood. Truth, he's back from the dead. The precursors, please buy the game.
The original Gravemind's still alive.
He's back, guys. He's back, Gravemind.
He's got all of the prophets in his skin now.
Yeah.
Just like an army of them.
Thankfully, Halo doesn't seem to be in that situation. I am happy that discourse is starting to shift away from the graphics, and now people are actually talking about what they saw and are getting a little bit more excited.
Well, I mean, obviously the takeaway of the first and second day was Krug the Brute, which I don't think we talked about.
Oh, yeah, Craig.
Or Craig the Brute.
Yeah, Craig the Brute. Yeah, something was wrong. So 343's games, the Covenant do emote in combat. You can see like their mouths moving when they're talking and stuff. So I wonder if in that demo something was broken and it was just for some reason none of the enemies were emoting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the thing that everyone's saying right now is, oh, it's just an early version of the game.
Well, that's interesting in its own right, because demos that they show off at things like E3, the unfortunate part about those kind of things is they're usually built independently from the actual video game that the company is developing. Because, like, these they're not going to bring an entire 70 gigabyte video game to the conference and play a tiny part of it. They're just going to specialize on one place, maybe, 10 gigabytes or whatever, and they're going to make a very specific level to show off there. And then what's kind of sad is that stuff usually just gets chucked in the garbage because you can't just integrate it into your primary video game.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the infamous version of that was the Halo 2 demo from E3 2003.
Yeah, the Halo 2 demo, that was built entirely independently from the actual video game Halo 2.
Well, yeah,
and same with, like, Halo 5, that whole Battle of Sunayon thing. No, that had to be specifically built to show off at E3. They probably took the level geometry and then created a whole bunch of new encounters and situations and stuff. And then when they were done showing it off, they're like, all right, guys, that whole little thing that we just built goes in the trash.
Oh, that poor team. That poor team that spends so much time working on that.
Well, and then you've got kind of like the current situation with COVID everywhere, and I'd imagine that polishing up a demo like that from home is really hard, on top of knowing that, like, you're never actually gonna use that in the game. I mean, all the level geometry, fine, but the pacing of the encounters, it's gonna be different in the final game. So I imagine some of that was like, don't worry about the polish, just make sure it shows off what we want to show off.
Well, speaking of COVID, one of the other announcements that they mentioned was that the flighting program is going to be radically cut because they just don't have the resources now to do a full series of early access for the people, for the community.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that.
Well,
I mean, I do understand, though, that it's not, like, a choice that they just made to mess with the community. They did lose a month's work because of COVID. Remember when Seattle, or I guess Washington State, declared like a state of emergency, and it was kind of like, okay, everyone go home now, there's a pandemic. There was about a month of people getting reorganized and set up to work from home.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, I can't even imagine running doing all the work you would need to do for a video game on a home computer. I mean, I assume they've still got render farms they need to be able to work with, and now they have to do that all remotely.
Yeah.
Good grief. So the fact that they're going to be able to get this game on time for the launch, and the fact that they're even going to launch the consoles themselves in November is kind of a miracle.
Yeah, the console launch in November, that's one where I'm like, that's going to be interesting, seeing how that plays out.
Well, we don't know how the pandemic's going to be played out, if it's going to be mostly played out or even partially played out by that point. I mean, I can't imagine.
Not.
Well, I don't know how they're going to want to handle the release at that point. Are they just going to say, just order it off of Amazon, it'll be delivered? I mean...
The console? Or the game?
Or the console, I mean, because a lot of people are going to want to get the launch, the first day launch console.
Yeah, it's I'm pretty worried about the health of some of those folk if they like wait in line outside of a Best Buy or something.
I'm sure they can like put social distancing things up, but that means that there's going to be like a 2-mile line up to the front door.
Yeah, it's like, guys, maybe worry about your health over a plastic box.
I mean, I remember when the SNES Classic came out, they actually handled that in a really intelligent way. Where they just had everyone show up to the Best Buy like 2 hours before it opened. They gave everyone that was already in line was given like a little piece of paper and said, "This is your number. Come back at a prescribed time, and we'll give you the console at that point." So maybe they handle it like that, where it's just like, "Hey,
pretty good.
Yeah, you don't stand in line. Just take a reservation number. You come at the time. You have a console guaranteed for you." I mean, I would hope that they have some plans like that capable, because at the very least, GameStop should not be opening up at like 10 o'clock at night if things are this bad 4 months from now.
Yeah, remember when GameStop tried really hard to insist that they were like special and they needed to be open?
That was a fun week.
Yeah, that was a really fun week. I used to work at GameStop, and it's so like I understand that company is not doing too hot, you know, because everyone's just like ordering things online or downloading digital games, but it's like, come on, GameStop, don't like this isn't about the customers and keeping them safe. This is about keeping your own employees safe.
I mean, I stopped subscribing. I was a GameStop member for an embarrassingly long time, and I made a decided decision a while back not to do it. And now every once in a while I'll go in there because I need something, and they'll be like, you want to re-up your subscription? You could have saved like $15 in the past year and a half. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think you're going to exist in a year, so I'm going to go ahead and hedge my bets.
Yeah, the reason that they ask to do that is because that specific employee is gonna get chewed out by his manager if he doesn't get a certain amount of, like, quotas filled.
Oh, gosh.
I feel so bad for all the people there. Usually when they ask for game protection, they're like, "Can I throw on a protection for $2?" I always do it because I'm like, dude, I get it. Don't worry.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays I just try my best to find the least morally objectionable company I can to order it from, because every one of them just seems to be a little bit more seedy than I want to pay for.
Yeah, I've had pretty good experiences just buying from GameStop. All the employees there seem like really bored and kind of out of it.
Oh,
so I can get in and out.
The employees are great. It's the people I know who run the company who I don't like.
Yeah.
Like, I have no problem being there, like, oh, because every time I go to GameStop, the employees are always cool, and they're conversational, and they like talking, and all that stuff. So it's not like I have a problem with them, I just have a problem with the guy hovering over their shoulders, telling them they have to fill their quota by selling Game Informer to grandmas.
Yeah, they have to have 15 Game Informer subscriptions, so they need to give this many game protections per week, like, yeah.
Whatever. But yeah, do we have any, what other news have we heard? I mean, I heard 2 or 3 things, but what have you heard that was interesting on this?
So the equipment system seems to be functioning completely different from how it is in the campaign in the multiplayer. That was a weirdly convoluted way to say that. The equipment will be different in multiplayer.
Okay, I mean, I kind of picked that up from the way they were talking about it initially, but what do we have any details on that?
No, because they're being unusually tight-lipped about the multiplayer. In the campaign, at least, looking at the footage, like, the drop shield thing that he picked up, that looked like, almost like a grenade or something that you could just kind of toss onto the ground, while the shield, or the grappling hook seemed almost like an armor ability, something that was regenerating.
Yeah, it seems like there's going to be things that are built into the Chief, and then there are things that are just drop items, like in Halo 3.
Yeah, and then there's that, like, upgrade slot in the little tac map that he brings up, so it's like, is that what the upgrades are? Like, adding armor abilities to the Chief's suit?
Kind of seems that way. I mean, it would be easier if we if we'd seen it, but they haven't really decided to talk about that yet.
Right, and they're teasing us. They're not trying to give everything away. They're just trying to tease us with little things. Like, that crashed frigate, when she first steps out of the crashed Pelican, he looks to his right for a second, and you can see what almost looks like the Forward Unto Dawn, like that type of ship, but it's just crashed. And there's a little door that's wide open, and you can see kind of like a cloth draped over the door, which is like game developer language for enter here. And Chief deliberately does not go over to it and instead runs over to a warthog, and I'm like, no, go back. I want to see what's in that crashed frigate.
Well, it is interesting that they're bringing back the Forward Unto Dawn style frigate. Like, I know you pointed out on Twitter a couple days ago that they're kind of integrating the Halo 5 designs with the classic Halo design, so they're all going to be in there.
Yeah, well, the pilot mentions that there's some crashed Condors, and Halo Wars 2 kind of refitted the Halo 5 era Pelican into a new thing called the Condor. And it's like, oh, okay. So, like, not all the things are going away. On top of the box art for the game having a wasp that was crashed. So there's a bit of history to the Halo universe this time around. It's not just, like, designs being replaced.
Yeah, I'm glad they're doing that, because I always kind of thought that, at least artistically, some of the reason why the art style change in Halo 4 and 5 was important because it represented a technologically advanced humanity onward several years from the war. So, but they never really explored the logistics of that and just how advanced humanity was at that point, beyond the fact that they now had shield generators on all their ships. But
yeah, like 4 years after the end of the war, suddenly humanity is like hundreds of years into the future technologically, and there's no trace anywhere of how things used to look.
I mean, I guess you could kind of say that that's because so much of the world and the Navy just got utterly obliterated by the end of Halo 3, that maybe this is just them having rebuilt. But
even in Vietnam, the United States was still using technology from World War II, because it's like, all that stuff you made for the war, that's not just gonna vanish. Like, you've got to use that equipment until it breaks down beyond repair, and then replace it with more modern stuff. Yeah, that's one of my criticisms about how they handled that. It was like, a redesign of the Halo universe is okay. The problem was that it was a complete redesign, to the point that even material that would take place in the past, like that Fall of Reach miniseries, for some reason they all had Halo 4 style armor, and there were Halo 4 grunts, and it's like, where is everything? Why does it all look like Halo 4?
Yeah, I mean, that's a weird lack of integration on 343's part. I mean, I'm sure it has something to do with either saving money on models or brand integration.
It's also branding. It's the same reason why those, like, Master Chief novels, they all kind of sport armor that are reminiscent of whatever the current Halo game is on market. It's just brand recognition.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm pleasantly surprised that Halo Infinite seems to not be doing the Halo 4 thing of, all right, time for another artistic redesign. They are treating the universe with a bit more respect. You can see what was in the past and what is now in the present.
I kind of wish they would pull the trigger on officially giving him a new set of armor at some point, because they've been kind of... It's at one point it seemed like the Halo 4 the deal was going to be that he was going to get a new set of armor. I mean, his current set is probably just ruined, given what we know what happened to his Mark V armor in Halo 1. But
yeah,
I mean, his current set is
Agent Locke punched the glass off of his visor in a really bad cutscene.
Oh man, you'd think that he would swap to the Mark 7 at some point, because we know it exists, but.
Well, he does have a new set of armor in Halo Infinite. We haven't seen that before.
I thought that was just a redesign of the classic armor, or that was just the artistic rendering of the classic armor. I didn't realize that was a new set altogether.
Yeah, Chief didn't, like, get home, take off his Halo 5 armor, and then go to the closet and get out his old costume. Like, no, that is technically a new suit of armor.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it does look different, especially the color. The tone's a lot lighter than any of the previous editions.
Yeah, it's the same tone as Combat Evolved, where it's almost like a yellow. It's like a light green.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird shade, but it looks cool.
It's very poppy, and obviously I do think that turns some folk off. I like it. I like when Halo looks like toys. Halo 3 is my favorite Halo game artistically. I don't want it to look like Reach. I don't want it to be like brown and miserable. I want my game to look fun.
That's fair. So do you have anything else you want to talk about, or?
We could probably talk about the graphics a little bit if you wanted.
Sure.
Because Digital Foundry, if you're familiar with them, they did a pretty excellent breakdown on what might not be working graphically.
I haven't seen that. Could you send that my way and I can look at it later?
Yeah, I'll give you a link to it after this is done. It's a pretty good video, and it seems like... So 343 seems to be using the same kind of lighting techniques of Far Cry 3. And Far Cry 3, like, don't get me wrong, that game is old, but at the time, that game was actually, like, maybe over-ambitious for what it was trying to do. It was, like, quite a few years ahead of its time graphically, and on the Xbox 360, and especially the PS3, that game's frame rate was terrible because of what it was trying to push graphically. But it's like, Far Cry 3 is a pretty old game, and there are some cracks. Like, whenever you step into an indoor environment in that game, everything just looks wrong. It looks very, like, flat and kind of weird. And Digital Foundry pointed out that Halo Infinite seems to have that similar problem. Most of the level that we saw in that demo was shrouded in shadow because of the way that the level was kind of constructed. You had a lot of these tall cliff sides, and Chief was kind of fighting underneath them, or you had giant rolling hills that were casting a shadow over play spaces. And so because of that, unfortunately, a lot of the game was shrouded in a very unflattering light.
I noticed that when he was driving the Warthog, when he was driving towards the hill, I'm like, is that a hill, or is he about to drive into a tree? And then you see him drive up it and fly over. It's like, oh, it was a hill.
Yeah, it's something doesn't look quite right. You can't really get a good sense of just space or depth whenever he's in the shadows. Like, nothing looks like it's, shaded properly. And in real life, you can have shadows despite being in shadows. Like, there's different layers of lighting and stuff. And it's Halo Infinite, it seems like if you're under a shadow, just boom, universally across the board, no more shading on anything. So it makes everything look really flat, but then in that demo, the second Chief will stand in direct sunlight, things look a lot better.
Oops. So what do you think is going to be... I mean, do you think there's going to be a chance to kind of tighten that up before the launch?
I do think that there are tricks that you can pull to tighten that up. Like, it's definitely not unfixable. I mean, Far Cry 3... with a reshade, you can correct a lot of its issues when you're in indoor lighting. Halo Infinite, all I would probably do is like, all right, let's bump up the contrast a little bit, like, and boom, we're good to go. Yeah, I do think it is something that 343 can actually fix internally. They probably can't readjust how the lighting is handled across the board, but they can definitely tweak the colors. and just how the game presents itself to make itself look more flattering.
I would hope so. I mean, I hope they're taking notes from the fan base as they're getting all this feedback, because I'm sure.
Yeah.
I can only imagine how it felt when they were watching that live stream, what they were thinking as that was going down, because it seemed like most people were happy, but there were a lot of reservations, and everyone's like, technical problem this and facial animation that. I can imagine what it felt like to be in that position, where you're like, okay, we've been working on this for 5 years, and unfortunately we have to show Craig 4 months before launch.
Yeah, that's like, I'd imagine if you were just like Joe Schmo who was working on like environmental detail, or you were one of the engineers who had to like code the way that objects are drawn into existence or called out of existence whenever the player's moving through them. And then you have like people online who are just like, looks bad, delay the game. And it's just like, I've been working on this for so long. Like, dude, just don't lazily dismiss it.
This has been a half decade of my life.
Yeah.
Good grief.
Yeah, there is a lot of cool stuff that Halo Infinite is doing. I just think, unfortunately, yeah, there needs to be a little bit of tweaking to the presentation to make it look a bit more palatable.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like it's almost there, though. Like, it's shy of the details.
Oh, yeah. So what I'm very excited about is actually getting that to play for myself, because YouTube, the bitrate on YouTube, it's starting to actually become a problem where people are speaking up about it. YouTube, just the bitrate of those videos don't do any game justice. They make things look very flat, and they kind of remove texture detail. And on that, if you watch the video in 4K and slow down the footage, you can see a lot of detail that is there, but sometimes, artifacting from the video playback comes in, or just YouTube's crappy, rendering of videos. I want to see the game on my own computer or console before I say that it looks bad.
Yeah, I imagine that would probably make a difference, especially getting a sense of the feel of the game and the flow of the game. Because that doesn't seem like something you can really pick up just by looking at someone else play it.
Yeah. And I mean, the gameplay actually does look really fun. I'm somebody who doesn't like enhanced mobility Halo, and I looked at that and I was like, oh, that reminds me a lot of like a Halo game. I want to play that.
Yeah, it's a synthesis, so you still got a little bit of the advanced mobility, but the most egregious aspects of it seem to have been toned down and
well, yeah. What's important is how the enhanced mobility is being used this time. Halo 5 was a game where that was the game, the enhanced mobility. This seems like they've recontextualized it so that the enhanced mobility is just how the player moves. The actual focus of the game is on your surroundings, on external things that are not a part of the player, and that's what has me happy.
Nice. So I don't have much else to say on it. Do you have any final closing thoughts on it?
No, those are just my final thoughts on it.
All right, we have our part 2 out. Maybe if hopefully we don't get any more information drops in the next hour in the next weekend.
Yeah, we'll get like part 8 or 9 or something. Like, more information has come out.
Oh gosh, stop! I can't keep editing. At some point, they just release all the details of the multiplayer at once. Make my life easy, please.
Just live stream the whole game from start to finish.
All right, good talking to you again.
Yeah, man.
Have a good day. The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel. Artwork by Crystal Cowley. And original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.